Hello and welcome back to the History Place, where we look at the historical facts they do not teach you in schools. I am the History Lady, here to lead you through some of the most interesting tales from the past. Let's dive in. Today's video will explore tales of those who were unfortunate enough to be buried alive. Before the greatness of modern medical knowledge, being buried alive was somewhat of a common occurrence, so much so that by the Victorian era, people had become so fearful that taphophobia, the fear of being buried alive, had then become a prominent paranoia shared by many. Doctors, physicians, and other medical professionals sought to come up with methods to properly ensure that a patient was dead. There were even changes made to coffins, such as coffin lids that can open from the inside, or the tradition of coffin bells, a bell which the person would ring had they awoken to discover they were inside a coffin. In 1822, a 40-year-old German shoemaker was laid to rest, but there were questions about his death from the start. Although the shoemaker's family confirmed his passing, he looked dead, they said. No one could detect any stench or rigidity in the cadaver. Still, the funeral went on as planned, but as the gravedigger was dispersing the last shovels full of dirt onto the grave, he heard a knocking from below. Reversing his process and now removing the earth as quickly as possible, the gravedigger found the shoemaker moving inside his coffin. His arms were drawn upward, he wasn't cold, and when an attending physician opened a vein, blood flowed all over the shroud. Over the course of 3 days, resuscitation attempts were made, but all efforts were fruitless. The shoemaker was declared dead once more and laid to rest for a second and final time. In 1915, a 30-year-old South Carolinian named Essie Dunbar suffered a fatal attack of epilepsy, or so everyone thought. After declaring her dead, doctors placed Dunbar's body in a coffin and scheduled her funeral for the next day so that her sister, who lived out of town, would still be able to pay respects. But Dunbar's sister didn't travel fast enough. She arrived only to see the last clods of dirt thrown atop the grave. This didn't sit well with Dunbar's sister, who wanted to see Essie one last time. She ordered that the body be removed. When the coffin lid was opened, Essie sat up and smiled at all around her. She lived for another 47 years. In 1867, a 24-year-old French woman named Philomèle Jeannetre contracted cholera. Not long after, she was presumed dead. As was custom, a priest arrived to administer the last sacraments, and Jeannetre's body was placed in a coffin. Only 16 hours later, her body was lowered 6 feet underground. Like the shoemaker's case, a gravedigger heard Jeannetre knocking against her coffin lid and promptly removed her from the earth. Though no breath was apparent when a lit candle was placed under her nose, distinct rhythmical sounds could be heard in her chest, and she exhibited some muscle contraction and eyelid twitching. This didn't last long, however. Jeannetre was officially pronounced dead the following day and was buried a second time. The case of 19-year-old Frenchman Angelo Hayes has been described as probably the most remarkable 20th century instance of alleged premature burial. In 1937, Hayes wrecked his motorcycle, with the impact throwing the young man from his machine headfirst into a brick wall. Hayes's face was so disfigured that his parents weren't allowed to view the body. After locating no pulse, the doctors declared Hayes dead, and 3 days later, he was buried. But because of an investigation helmed by a local insurance company, his body was exhumed 2 days after the funeral. Much to those at the Forensic Institute's surprise, Hayes was still warm. He had been in a deep coma, and his body's diminished need for oxygen had kept him alive. After numerous surgeries and some rehabilitation, Hayes recovered completely. In fact, he became a French celebrity. People travelled from afar to speak with him, and in the 1970s, he went on tour with a very souped-up security coffin he invented, featuring thick upholstery, a food locker, toilet, and even a library. Due to the rise in numbers of people being reportedly buried alive, a variety of unusual methods were used to test for signs of life among the apparent dead. Tobacco smoke enemas were commonly employed in 18th century Europe to try to resuscitate the apparently dead. Smoke, blown through a pipe into the rectum using a bellows or from the mouth of an unflinching rescuer, was thought to bring people back from the brink of death. Drowning victims were subjected to smoke enemas after being hauled from the water, with occasional and coincidental success. Waiting mortuaries, in which bodies were kept until they showed signs of putrefaction, gained popularity in Europe during the late 1800s. They were essentially hospitals for the dead, their wards of corpses watched over constantly by nurses. In order to mask the smell of rotting human flesh and organs, flower arrangements were placed beside each bed. At the apparent dead house in the Netherlands, attendants held feathers and mirrors in front of the corpses' mouths to check if they were still breathing. Safety coffins addressed the primal fear of premature burial by incorporating design features such as air tubes, strings linking the body's hands and feet to an above-ground bell, flag or lights, and, for coffins installed in vaults, spring-loaded lids. Despite the rash of patents and production, there are no reported cases of the left for dead being saved by such contraptions. Few are more dramatic than the tale of Rufina Cambaceres, the Argentinian woman known as the girl who died twice. The story goes that in 1902, on her 19th birthday, Rufina was getting ready for a night out in Buenos Aires when she lost consciousness and collapsed. 3 doctors declared her dead, and the young socialite was placed in a coffin, given a funeral, and sealed in a tomb at Recoleta Cemetery. A few days later, according to the legend, a cemetery worker noticed that the coffin had moved. Suspecting a grave robber, he opened the casket and discovered scratch marks on the inside. Rufina had been buried alive, awakened in her tomb, and made an escape attempt, smashing and scratching the door before she died of cardiac arrest. Like many buried alive stories, it is difficult to separate truth from fiction, and Rufina's story is told with varying layers of embellishment. In one version, her initial death is caused by the scandalous revelation that her boyfriend had been sleeping with his own mother. Whether it's all true or the result of overactive imaginations, Rufina's tomb is worth visiting for its haunting beauty alone. It features a full-size statue of the girl gazing out at the cemetery while holding the door to the very mausoleum that entrapped her. Thank you for sharing some history with us today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time.